Council, 2002, 2003. He worked with Condoleezza Rice there, and at the State Department. This is an article in this month's Esquire, The Secret History of the Impending War with Iran That the White House Doesn't Want You to Know. It's written by John Richardson, but Mr. Leverett is kind of the focus of this article. Mr. Leverett, are you convinced that the Bush administration will bomb or attack Iran in some fashion?
I wouldn't say I'm convinced. I would say that I am concerned that the risk that they will end up there is rising dramatically. I think that risk is already significant. I think it's rising, and I'm concerned because I think this would be a very bad, not to say disastrous course for American policy in the region.
Why do you think that the risk is rising? What signs are you seeing?
I'm seeing a number of signs. I mean, first of all, those in the administration, and I would put them mostly at the State Department, who don't think it's advisable to go down the military path, have been relying for more than a year on a strategy that relies on being able to ratchet up pressure on Iran through the United Nations Security Council. I don't think this strategy is going to work. Frankly, some of the people who push this strategy at the State Department don't think it's going to resolve the nuclear issue, but they think it could at least buy time, kick the can down the road, hold off pressures for a military solution. But now we see the Security Council increasingly deadlocked over the issue of taking additional sanctions against Iran. I think that is opening the door within the administration and in the wider body politic for hardliners to increase pressure on the administration. You see an increasing hardening of administration rhetoric about Iran. You see efforts underfoot, under consideration to declare at least part of the Revolutionary Guard, a part of the Iranian government, a terrorist organization. On multiple fronts, you see indications that the policy line is certainly hardening rhetorically, and you also see indications that the arguments of those who are arguing that ultimately this must be dealt with militarily, those arguments are gaining strength within the administration.
Some people are going to have heard you use the phrase, it gives us a chance to kick the can down the road. What's the advantage for the U.S. to just kick the can down the road and not stop the nuclear process? Do you think a nuclear process is going on in Iran?
I think it's clear that the Iranians are trying to develop the ability to enrich uranium on an industrial scale, which would give them an important part of what you might call a breakout capability, a capability to enrich uranium, store it. If they decided they wanted to go for a nuclear weapon, they could take that stockpile of enriched uranium and enrich it to higher levels that you need to use for a nuclear weapon. The Iranians would still have to solve all of the engineering problems involved in fabricating the weapon, outfitting it for delivery. We don't have any real indications that they've been working on those parts of a nuclear weapon program, but it is clear that they're working to develop a capability to enrich uranium, and that could be an important component of a nuclear option.
But kicking the can down the road, when do we deal with it?
Well, I think for those who, as I do, don't believe that a military solution is really feasible or desirable for this problem, the real answer is going to be a diplomatic solution, but that's going to require a really serious strategic dialogue with Iran and a willingness on the part of the United States. If we can have our concerns about weapons proliferation, about Iranian ties to terrorist organizations, Iran's attitude about the Arab-Israeli conflict, if we can have those concerns addressed, we're going to have to be prepared to put a security guarantee, a commitment on our part not to use force to change the borders of the form of government of the Islamic Republic of Iran on the table. That's something that this president, this administration is not prepared to do. And so those still in the administration who are pushing for a diplomatic solution, they can't really push for a solution. The best they can do with diplomacy is buy time, hope the nuclear problem doesn't come to a head, at least not while President Bush is in office. That's what I mean by kick the can down the road.
And finally, before we go to calls, this article focuses back to 2001 and talks about some of the contacts that you and your
my
wife,
that's
Hillary
right.
Mann,
Yes.
had with the Iranians, and what happened to those?
Well, my wife was particularly central to this. She, at the time of the 9/11 attack, she was serving in our mission to the United Nations, and she was already talking with Iranian counterparts about Afghanistan in the context of what was called the 6+2 process within the UN to deal with Afghanistan. After the 9/11 attacks, the Iranians offered us various types of assistance in getting rid of the Taliban, standing up a successor regime, and my wife was really one of two U.S. government officials. The other was Ryan Crocker, now the U.S. ambassador in Iraq, who basically conducted regular discussions with senior Iranian diplomats coordinating U.S. and Iranian efforts in Afghanistan. And the cooperation that the Iranians offered to us through that channel was really quite extraordinary. But their reward for it was to be labeled part of the axis of evil, to have their overtures for a wider dialogue, a dialogue that really would get at all of these strategic differences between our two countries in the way that I described earlier, to have those overtures rebuffed. And at this point, that channel is essentially non-operative. Ambassador Crocker periodically sees his Iranian counterpart in Baghdad, but those conversations, from everything I hear, are really going nowhere. And the administration is simply not interested in a real strategic dialogue with Iran.
Does Condoleezza Rice support this policy of no carrots, no dialogue?
My sense is that she supports the policy of trying to use diplomacy to kick the can down the road, whatever her personal views of the desirability of offering carrots might be. She's not going to push the president on that one. She's not going to take him out of his comfort zone on that. And it means we have really a feckless policy.
Our guest is Flint Leverett, former Senior Director for Middle East Affairs at the National Security Council. Left in 2003, left the State Department in 2003 because
I actually left the White House in March of 2003.
Over policy
I tell
differences?
people the timing wasn't coincidental. That's right, policy differences. I thought the administration was making a lot of mistakes on Iraq, on the Palestinian issue, on Iran, on a number of Middle Eastern issues, and the mistakes had accumulated to a point where I couldn't stay any longer.
And is your wife still employed by the government?
No. She went on maternity leave when our son, who's now 3.5, was born. And after a certain period on maternity leave, she resigned from the State Department, so she's no longer in government service either.